This is Sky World News with Luquesa Burak.
Good morning, you're watching World News. Our top stories, and Iran has expressed regret over the storming of the British embassy by students in Tehran. They were protesting against the UK's decision to impose sanctions on Iranian banks. We'll have more on this story live in a moment. Also, a national day of action is underway in Britain in protest at the government's plans to reform public sector pensions. The walkout is likely to involve up to 2 million workers. And the plane carrying Ivory Coast's Laurent Gbagbo has arrived in the Netherlands. He faces trial at the International Criminal Court. OK, let's return to our top story now, the storming of the British embassy in Tehran. And Arash Aramesh is an Iranian analyst at Stanford University, and he joins me from California. Thank you for joining us. In your opinion, do you think that this action that was taken could have happened without the approval of senior figures in the Iranian government?
First of all, this is in clear violation of international law. The host nation is always responsible for protecting embassies on its land. So second point is that the Iranian government has one of the strongest coercive apparatus in the region. If you remember in 2009, when hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Iranians were protesting against the regime, the government managed to deploy a substantial number of forces on the streets and quench demonstrations. Now, when you have a few hundred at best demonstrators or so-called regime supporters or so-called students, as they've been so designed and designated by Iranian news agencies, when they attack the British embassy and they can so easily overrun the police forces, you got to ask a question whether the government took appropriate measures to stop them, or B, they actually were okay with this. Again, they could have. This was foreseeable. This is a government where anti-Western rhetorics are all over the place, and when you have such outrageous incidents happening, you should have enough protective measures in place to prevent occupation and destruction of property of another government's embassy.
Well, do you think then that the Iranian government is going to take any notice whatsoever of the British government and the American government saying that something has to be done to get things under control?
Well, the relationship between the Iranian government and the West, the EU, and the United States has been very bad. I mean, we all know that. For some time now, it's been actually getting worse. On Sunday, the Iranian parliament voted to lower diplomatic relations with England, with Great Britain. In every Friday prayer, almost, you hear chants of death to America and death to England and death to Israel. So bringing these regime supporters who are supporting the regime to justice is something that probably isn't going to happen. But what's going to happen is this is going to have far-reaching consequences for a government that allows such actions to take place. And the West is definitely going to make sure that its message is going to be heard, whether it's going to be through sanctions or through lowering its diplomatic ties with Iran. This sort of outrageous behavior has no place in the diplomatic arena.
OK, well, obviously, a lot of this, the sanctions and all this action is focused on Iran's nuclear ambitions. Any thoughts that this could bring military action closer?
Well, it certainly doesn't help preventing the military actions. When unfortunately, what it does, it justifies tougher use of force and against such a regime. Again, there are two big problems that the West has in dealing with Iran. First and foremost, the nuclear problem, the nuclear issue, and second, its brutal human rights record. So by allowing demonstrators to occupy, burn, ransack, and harass embassy occupants, this is not going to help their cause preventing a military strike. It's definitely going to. We're certainly going to see a tougher sanctions regime against Iran by the West. That's it's already happened, and it's going to get worse. Whether there's going to be military strikes, I don't know. I certainly hope not. It's going to be very destabilizing for the entire region. But such actions do not help at all. Again, the regime could foresee this coming. 2 years ago, when I was in Serbia, and when the local authorities could see that there was a soccer match, and local authorities could foresee that the Croatian and the American embassy could come under attack by soccer hooligans, they provided plenty of security forces and state troops to protect these embassies, including the Iranian embassy, which helped anti-Serbian elements during the Kosovo-Serbian war and the Bosnian-Serbian war. So again, it's nothing out of the ordinary to expect such things might happen, especially in such a hostile environment. So you have to take measures to prevent it. Again, the buck stops here with the Iranian government. They're ultimately responsible for this, and there has to be consequences, diplomatic consequences.
Well, we'll see what happens there, Arash. But thank you very much for that assessment. Right, we're going to stay in America and more now on the sentencing of Michael Jackson's former doctor. Handing down a 4-year prison term, Judge Michael Pastor said Conrad Murray had become caught up in a cycle of medicine madness and ultimately abandoned the singer when he was most vulnerable.
The fact is that Michael Jackson died because of the actions of and the failures to perform legal duties on the part of Dr. Murray. Dr. Murray created a set of circumstances and became involved in a cycle of horrible medicine. The practice of propofol for medicine madness, which violated his sworn obligation for money, fame, prestige, and whatever else may have occurred.
Well, our US correspondent Greg Milam spoke to us from outside the court in Los Angeles.
Well, even as Dr. Conrad Murray begins his sentence proper, it's clear that there is still some way to go in this case. The district attorney here in Los Angeles has indicated that he is probably going to appeal against the decision to send Dr. Murray to a county jail rather than the state prison. Now, that's all bound up in a change of the law here designed to ease prison overcrowding. But the district attorney unhappy that Dr. Murray is not serving his time in a higher category jail. Lawyers for Dr. Murray also considering an appeal not only against the conviction but against the sentence. They were unhappy with what the judge had to say. They believed also that Dr. Murray, not having previous convictions, not having been found guilty of a crime of violence or using a weapon, was entitled to expect a sentence lower than the maximum, so that appeal may lie ahead as well. We've also had some detail from the probation service, who prepared a report before sentencing and quoted jailhouse records that said Dr. Murray had been suicidal, mentally disturbed before the sentencing hearing. Now his legal team have said he is resilient. That may well have referred to how he was feeling after conviction a few weeks ago, but they believe he is in a better state of mind now. The Jackson family, of course, also have civil lawsuits that lie ahead. That, together with those various appeals, mean we may well still have more to hear in the case of Conrad Murray and the case surrounding the death of Michael Jackson.
That was Greg Milam speaking to us there from Los Angeles. We're going to cross to the Gulf now and get an update on the business from that region. On the line is the Dow Jones Qatar correspondent, Alex Delmar Morgan. Morning to you, Alex. Qatar is looking for money and lots of it. Why?
Good morning. Yeah, Qatar's looking to raise at least $2 billion via a bond issue. It's done this before. It's no stranger to raising big sums of money, and when you want to raise large sums of money, it's often much cheaper to do it at the state level because you get much more favourable terms. And Qatar's a AAA, a sovereign rated entity, and part of the reason it's doing this is because there's a huge demand for infrastructure in the country. I mean, the country actually has, funnily enough, one of the fastest growing populations in the world, mainly because of a large overseas workforce. I mean, the majority of people that live in Qatar are expatriates, and this is creating demand for everything from roads to power stations. I mean, they're building new airports, they're building a port, and all this costs money. In addition, they've also got the World Cup to think about. They've got many stadia to build. To give you an idea, they want to invest $225 billion in the next 5 years on domestic investment. So that figure kind of gives you an idea of what they're up to.
OK, well, obviously there's a lot going on, and it seems that the region's aviation industry is also making moves. They had a big meeting. What came out of that?
Yeah, they had a meeting yesterday. I mean, part of the more, one of the things being discussed there was Syria and sanctions. I mean, obviously, as we know, the Arab League has slapped sanctions on Syria, and very soon Middle East airlines that fly to Damascus and other cities in the Middle East, it's quite a big market for them. They're going to have to stop flying there, and this is obviously going to make them suffer. The big airlines in the Gulf, like Etihad, Qatar Airways, and Emirates, they will be fine. They can probably get over this. They have a huge a footprint across the world, but the smaller, low-cost carriers will definitely suffer. I mean, looking at it slightly more broadly, the Arab Spring has hurt the region's aviation industry, and I mean, if the crisis deepens, then I think growth will slow quite considerably.
Okay.
In the sector next year, but we'll have to see how it pans out.
All right, Alex, speaking to us there from Qatar, thank you. Now, an international team of scientists believe they've made a breakthrough in the fight against malaria, which is a disease that kills up to 800,000 people every year. Well, it means new drugs to treat the illness could now be developed. Sky's science correspondent Katie Stallard reports.
After the floods had ravaged their village, the waters left behind a breeding ground for malaria. Every 45 seconds, a child in Africa dies from the disease. It's responsible for 1 in 5 childhood deaths across the continent. But halfway across the world, an international team of scientists believe they've made a breakthrough in the fight against the disease.
What we're able to do here in the lab is to grow the human malarial parasite in culture. So what happens in malaria is that it's a single cell organism and it's able to go into red blood cells.
Researchers here at the University of Leicester, together with teams in Switzerland and Canada, have discovered the group of proteins the disease needs to survive inside the human body. Effectively, the malaria parasite's Achilles heel.
What we've got underneath the microscope here, some infected red blood cells. The ones that are infected with the parasite appear really deeply purple stained. And in some cases, you can see that the parasite has progressed to such a stage where you can see the individual baby parasites, if you like, inside the red blood cell, ready to burst out. We've found 36 proteins which are essential for the parasite to survive. The drugs that we're developing will attack the parasite wherever it is in the body.
The malaria parasite is injected into the bloodstream through the bite of the Anopheles mosquito. From there, it makes its way inside the red blood cells, the cells that carry oxygen around the body. Once inside the red blood cell, the parasite is protected from the body's immune response, effectively sheltered from attack. But if scientists can target the proteins within the cell that the parasite needs to survive, they can kill the parasite inside the red blood cell and stop the disease in its tracks. The next stage will be to develop a drug that specifically targets this group of proteins to stop them from working. And here in the lab, they've already started screening different compounds. If they can do that, they'll have a new way to kill the malaria parasite and cure a disease that targets some of the world's poorest and most vulnerable people.
It's great to have a breakthrough for a disease which doesn't get enough funding and enough research, and that's mainly because it doesn't affect people in rich countries. But the question's always going to be, have we got the funding, have we got the health workers, have we got the infrastructure in place to get it to every child?
The researchers here are conscious that they're working against the clock, that just in the duration of this report, the statistics say another 3 African children will have died from the disease. So they're publishing their research today, opening it up to scientists across the globe to help. And they say it is perfectly realistic that together they will develop a drug to end this disease. Katie Stallard, Sky News, Leicester.
The man who confessed to killing 77 people in Norway could avoid prison after a psychiatric report found he was insane at the time. Well, if the findings upheld, Anders Breivik can't be sent to jail for July's attacks. Ian Woods explains.
He may be a mass killer, but in some ways Anders Behring Breivik has been a model prisoner, cooperating with the police at the scene of his crimes and with the 2 psychiatrists who assessed his mental state. They interviewed him 13 times for a total of 36 hours. But even though he was keen to talk, they said it wasn't an easy task.
It's been difficult considering the seriousness of the case, and it's been difficult to get into it, and difficult because of the sheer amount of material making it hard to get an overview. It has also been a difficult diagnostic process.
Their conclusion is that Breivik was psychotic at the time he detonated a bomb in the heart of Oslo and then drove to Utøya Island for a second attack. Victims there were stalked and shot. Some escaped by swimming for their lives.
To elaborate on the conclusions, the experts describe a person who finds himself in his own delusional universe, where all his thoughts and acts are governed by those delusions. They conclude that Anders Behring Breivik, over a long period of time, has developed the mental disorder of paranoid schizophrenia, which has changed him and made him into the person he is today.
He says his motivation for attacking young members of Norway's ruling party was to protect the country from immigration. He calls them executions rather than murders. One of those who survived despite being shot watched the news conference. Erin Christian Kjær says she now accepts Breivik was insane. Despite today's ruling, a lengthy trial is still due to begin next spring to hear the evidence. But it seems certain that, at its conclusion, Breivik will be sent to a secure psychiatric unit rather than prison, with his detention regularly reviewed. Ian Woods, Sky News.
Let's take you through our top stories then. Iran has expressed regret over the storming of the British embassy by students in Tehran. They were protesting against the UK's decision to impose sanctions on Iranian banks. A national day of action is underway in Britain in protest at the government's plans to reform public sector pensions.